last 10 years, third-party monitoring companies have become prominent service providers in the aid industry in Somalia. And the rise of these companies in Somalia led to the emergence of also an internationalized data business in which consultants companies compete for donor contracts to study aid-related impacts and phenomena in Somalia. And as a result, data production has become increasingly commodified. So the international the institutional competition between donors and aid agencies working in and on Somalia is the driving force behind the continuous replication or duplication of aid information. What is the impact of this? The local consulting companies usually collect data required and sent to international companies that are contracted by the donors, because donors don't often directly contract these local companies. And that international consulting companies does the analysis, the write-up, and then share the results with the client, with the donor. And there are also many Somali youth who work as enumerators or field monitors for international third-party monitoring companies, or also local companies. They worked for over a decade and just for collecting data. They don't have the opportunity actually to analyze and to be part of the production of the reports. These enumerators and also the beneficiaries of aid interventions in Somalia are not also present when these reports are presented. Although the uptake, the dissemination is very minimal, even when these are presented, they are not in the room. And the enumerators or the field monitors bear the huge risk of collecting data from very far and risky locations where humanitarian projects were implemented, but are not accessible to these international consulting companies who were awarded these contractors. But someone else who often gets the credit of writing the reports and using the data they have risked their lives for. There are key challenges that this aid and sector in Somalia faces. And this is the last thing I will conclude. I will have my remarks on the way forward later. The major challenge is the production of aid-related information in Somalia is the prevailing sense of interview fatigue among the aid recipients, because, as I said, it's duplication and everyone is going there, collecting their own data. Second challenge is that data production and for aid purposes in Somalia is often extractive, and they don't giving the beneficiaries no decision-making power or ownership. Third challenge, I would say, is that the entire research agenda, from the research design to the questionnaire to the implementation to the research production, is entirely driven by external actors. So local communities' lack of ownership in aid information in Somalia is particularly obvious in the lack of the dissemination, as I said before, of the research findings to local communities. And most of these studies are not published and not publicly available. Consulting firms and aid agencies collecting aid data store data, which is often sensitive and involves potential privacy issues. And also aid agencies have their own data archiving and disposal policies. And lastly, the state collapse in Somalia in 1991 and the years of political instability have led to a situation in which international actors have de facto privatized much of the knowledge and data production in Somalia. And I think this is in line with what the study you have just presented also found. Let me stop here to just give you some perspectives on aid data in Somalia, and over to you, Martin.
Thank you very much, Mahad. Yes, it's indeed a great, I think, illustration. Like I actually spotted the paper you produced on Somalia data after publishing the study, so I was really sad, but it was really much in line with what we wrote. So I was happy to see that it was kind of accurate in a way, at least for the Somalian case. Let me go next to Asha. So Asha, I think you will give a different perspective from first a different country, Tanzania, second, a different field, if I can say, because you're working on OpenStreetMap and open data mostly. And also because I think you have a great, we say, story of structuring an organization at the local level, producing data, talking to institutional actors, global and local. So maybe you can tell us a little bit like what you do, how you work, and how you manage to structure this local organization.
Okay, thank you, Martin. As I said before, I'm representing Open Map Development Tanzania, which is a non-profit organization based in Tanzania. So with our experience in open data and our organization in general, first of all, maybe I would want to say we are part of the 10 communities on the OSM Sustainable Exchange, where we are gaining skills, resources, as well as network. As opportunities for us to sustain after the introduction of the OSM community. So it all began back in 2017, where we are just awesome community, where we are conducting a project called Damani Huria. It's a flooding project which was conducted by the World Bank in Tanzania, along with Humanitarian OpenStreetMap team. That's where the local NGO that was established, which is Open Map Development Tanzania. Back then, up to now, we have 7 years in operation, and we have been able to conduct different projects across Tanzania, in East Africa in general, in data collection and open mapping, as well as we are contributors to OpenStreetMap. So I would say our experience in this is working with community initially. It has been our goal. We have our motto says local people, local device, and open knowledge. That's what we emphasize the most when we are doing our projects, our activities in our country, as well as in East Africa in general. So we emphasize in community generated data, that will involve community from the beginning of data collections to the end of. Also, we share back what we have collected, just to create the ownership of the community who are part of the challenge that we are looking out to figure out what are the solutions. So we apart from involving them from the data collection, but also we share back what we have collected, and also training them how to use the data that they have, being part of them, be part of correcting. So we are using their own devices in doing this data collection, showing them beyond the devices that they use, they can also be part of using them to be part of changes or voice in their communities. But also we participate in different government initiatives, just to create awareness of community generated or citizen generated data, so that to amplify them and them to be used for the decision makers in our country. So we participate in different trainings or workshop, but also we participate in training the government itself, as well as, for example, we were able to train or to help the censor campaign that was conducted in our country, just to emphasize the use of open tools, as well as citizen-generated data for decision making. So that's our experience in general. But to speak briefly about the OSM Community Sustainable Exchange, which is a platform that aims to empower and improve OSM communities, that has been established across Africa, as well as Asia and other part of the world, to enable them to sustain themselves after beyond fundings. As we know, most of these OSM communities have been established to either tackle a certain challenges when it comes to as an OSM community, but most of them fail to sustain themselves after the OSM fundings. So OSM Sustainable Exchange was established, the program that aims to remove this kind of issues and help them to sustain. As for us being one of the members of this or being one members of this OSM Sustainable Exchange, we are gaining all these skills with aim of being able for us to sustain ourselves. I think that we have, as I said, we have 7 years in running, so we would say we are sustainable, and also we are acting like a vision for other OSM communities around the world, especially those who are from Humanitarian OpenStreetMap team. That they can also stand, as we are able to stand just starting as an OSM community, and now we are a registered NGO, and we are working with different national and international organizations such as the World Bank, the World Food Program, in implementing different projects across the country and East Africa in general. So the exchange, this OSM Sustainability Exchange has been keen of showing us networks as well as resources, has been because one of the challenges that was discovered because of this before establishing of this program was skills, as well as the skills was the challenge, documentations, as well as the trust for donor funders to trust these small organizations to give them funding to implement different projects. So once it was established, the general aim is to have a white paper which will be a source, like a roadmap for OSM, for partners to invest in OSM community, but as well as it will strengthen the OSM community, since we are gaining skills and networks as well as knowledge at the same time, but also it will amplify the voice of citizen-generated data, so that it could be trusted with these decision makers in country as well as in the world generally. At the end of the day, the aim is to make this OSM community to be able to say they are sustainable, and also they can stand alone beyond the funding that has been given with the OSM community, or to start with all this humanitarian project from the beginning. So in general, that's what I would say has been our experience, and so far so good. And we are moving forward, and we are also, as I said, we are 10. So the communities from Kenya, from Ghana, from Senegal, from Bangladesh, and many more. Together, we are a community that aims to being our amplifier, that OSM community can be sustainable with the skills, knowledge, as well as the resources. And also we can be part of, we can amplify the voice of citizen-generated data for decision makers across the world. Thank you, Martin.
Thank you, Asha. Great presentation. So indeed, I think OpenStreetMap has always been an excellent example of local empowerment, of course, by its very nature, I would say. And with the Sustainability Exchange, so CartONG is one of the supporters we've got this exchange. We were trying to foster more like a local empowerment, local sustainability. And as we were working on that, we were looking for examples, and ran over the Flying Labs networks that I knew a little bit, but I never checked exactly how they were organized. And so Queen is going to present us a bit like their journey too, because I think what was great with your example is it was really a strategic choice at the global level from the founders to build a distributed power network. So if you can like tell us a bit this journey and how you built first, like the whole networks, the South Africa lab, and like your own organization, the whole package. We're listening to you.
Yes. Thank you so much for the opportunity. Yeah, as I said, that we are part of the global movement where we do drone for good, but I'll try to be more relevant to the theme for today. I think what drives all the flying labs that are in existence is what we call the power of local. We really believe in their power. You know, we believe in as my colleagues have said before, on giving them sustainable impact, because we realized before investors would come, do once-off project, and it's back to square one. So for us, it's important that we check all the relevant sustainable goal so that they remain sustainable, you know. So what we're doing basically, we are saying we want to return the power where it belongs to. And we believe that the power belongs to the locals. Why are we saying that? Because the locals have the knowledge. They actually have the expertise as well. And they have that relevant knowledge. It's a pity now that they're faced with challenges, and we think that then they might be a bit naive. But they have the knowledge, they've been there, and some of them actually come with the solutions. They just need someone to provide the relevant platform, tools, and resources to share those solutions with them, you know. And for us, that's what we're trying to do, to ensure that with the power of local, that power is equally distributed, and is very, very inclusive. You know, we are trying to run away from the approach where it was top-down approach. I'm coming with my money, I'm coming with investment, you listen to me. With Flying Labs, we promote bottom-up approach. You know, we need to really hear the pain of the local. And then that's why we say it's bottom-up approach, because we respond to their pain, unlike thinking that they have a problem with climate change. You find that not necessarily, there's a more pressing argument than the climate change, you know. So we respond according to what the pain the locals are going through it. And basically, obviously, I'll give you an example of a project that we did, that I'm demonstrating what we're talking about, you know. But we are not arrogant about saying, no, everything's about local. We are also aware, as you said before, Martin, that there are other local actors that plays a critical role, you know. So we are just saying how to balance the power for all the local actors, you know. So it's all about that. And also ensuring that while we're partnering with the locals, what is happening with the technology, because we tend to forget that they need to be exposed, our local need to be exposed to technology, to close the digital divide, you know, to be exposed to the jobs of the future. Hence, with Flying Labs, every time when we do a project, we ensure that we create training that will be able to sustain them. You know, for instance, everyone is thinking about drone pilot, but we as South African Flying Lab, our target is informal settlement, you know, those unemployed youth or local community that have never seen a drone before, but you are able to train them to become disaster management champion and then using drone, you know. So that's an example. So we're saying they're actually our future problem solvers, and why are we not partnering with them? Basically saying that we are not giving them a fish, we are teaching them how to fly to get to English now, how to get the fish instead of giving them the fish. But I wanted to go back to an example that actually we're humbled to share, and that it led to us as South African Flying Lab receiving so many humanitarian awards. We even flew recently to Washington. We've been, even the president of the country last month gave us another innovation award, because we as Flying Lab, we are allowed to choose what is important to your locals in your country. So for us, like the other countries, climate change in the form of floods but in fires in the informal settlement is becoming a serious crisis, you know. So we decided that, okay, we're seeing now that our competitors, they're using drones for disasters, but they're more into response. You know, they just use drones to do impact assessment, infrastructure, and all of that. But we decided to do the other way around. we focus on disaster preparedness, early warning system as well. That what is it that we can do to prepare the local actors, including the community, to prepare for disaster, because we know that climate change has become a reality. So this is the space we are at. We are trying to become a thought leader South African Flying Lab. So we identify, as a pilot, we identify an informal settlement called Alexander Township in Johannesburg, because it always has a problem with flood, you know. So we went and mapped there, but before we do that, we ensure we identify strategic local actors, which is unemployed youth, local leaders, and all of that. And obviously, we also extended the invite to the city of Johannesburg, because it's supposed to be their mandate to respond to disasters. But also what we did, we invited also UN agencies like UNICEF South Africa that actually funded the project together with We Robotics, you know. So you see that there are a lot of actors that we invite when we do such project partnering with local. So we map the area just to without any flood, you know, just to highlight the areas that we think were of high risk. Like, do we have any evacuation sites should the disaster happen, as an example, you know, and the water modeling and all of that. So immediately after flood, when the flood happened, I think after 8 months, we did what you call change detection exercise, where we went back to predict what we predicted before with that first exercise and what happens. Is there a correlation? Obviously, there was a 98% correlation. But what this information assist is that the local communities, they begin to take ownership, because we share the information with them. And that's like, if you keep on doing illegal dumpings, or you build your houses next to this a dam that is always flooded, you know, so they see everything that we are doing, you know. And as I said, the UN agencies were there also, in City of Johannesburg, and provincial government that is specialized in disaster risk management. So we share all these findings, but we challenge also government that we have the data, the information for you. What is it that you're gonna do so that you plan better to protect the communities? But also we challenge the communities back as well. What is it that now that you know the risk, you are also contributing to these disasters? What is it that you can do to do better? But we don't leave them with knowing information. Be careful, becoming a disaster management champion. We train them, as I said, that we train them to be drone pilots specializing in disaster risk management. We train them to be data process technician, because we know that not everyone could be a drone pilot. So we're saying there's a space where they're able to manipulate the data, to analyze it, so before it goes to the relevant stakeholders, you know. So basically, this is what we do with the data, and how we position the local community so that they become better positioned. Let me end there for now. Thank you.
Thank you, Quinn. Great example. Yeah, I might have some follow-up question for you, but let's hear all our speakers first then. So the last one, our last guest is not specifically from a local organization, but I wanted to invite someone from development initiatives, because as I was working on our study, I was really struggling to find sources actually on this question of local actors and data. There's not much literature produced, and like most of the people don't use this specific word. Like some of them talk about statistics inequality, some of them talk about like here community empowerment. And then I ran into, I don't remember which paper from DI, and it was kind of a gold mine. So I was like, okay, I have plenty of sources now. Super interesting. So Bill, I don't have a very specific question from you. It would be something more like, how do you react to all this presentation from your perspective and seniority? Because you're an organization that have introduced, I think, quite a lot of the debates we're talking about today. And I would say, what is your current perspective on these questions?
Thanks, Martin. I just wanted to start with 3 anecdotes. Some years ago, we were working in Uganda, in the West Nile province, where all the refugees from South Sudan come through. And we had a very good working relationship with the local district, the Adjumani district, who had a really good data infrastructure. And we were looking at how one could integrate local government data with the data that was being collected by INGOs. And at that stage, all the refugee camps, you drove into the area, and each INGO had their big billboard advertising what they were doing, and there were riots on the streets because the local people weren't being recruited into the jobs that were being created. So there was a very tense situation. We went to one of the UN agencies coordinating the operations there, and talked about, can we work together to see how we can join up local government data with the data that you need for your operations. And we got a very blunt reply. We were told, if anyone wants to help us in what we are doing, they are welcome to do so, but please do not get in our way. Move on a couple of years, and we were doing a data landscaping exercise in South Sudan. This was a commercial contract, and our clients were UNDP and UNICEF. And we were looking generally at the data production in South Sudan. This was between the first and second lockdown, so fairly recently. And we came to a really difficult conclusion. Given who our clients are, we concluded that what had been set up in South Sudan is a parallel government and a parallel data processing system, where the international agencies were totally ignoring any attempt of the government itself to build and mature in its own infrastructures. And we were really nervous about how we were going to report this. And at that stage, we came across Mahad's paper on the political economy of aid data in Somalia, and that actually gave us the confidence to speak out. This was, unfortunately, this was meant to be a public paper, and the UN decided not to publish it. But we learned a lot from that. More recently, we've been looking, as part of our interest in localization, I've taken a look at the data within the Humanitarian Data Exchange, which is an amazing repository. There are 20,000 data sets that humanitarian organizations use around the world. A lot of useful information in there. But I sort of took the trouble of downloading all the metadata, and we're just starting to sort of unpick and analyze it. And in my reckoning, about 95% of the data that is in that repository comes from non-national sources. And I think that on the issue of localization, my overall conclusion is we have a problem that is being caused by international organizations. And how do we go about solving that? And I think we need to look at the issue through two different lenses, the national level and the local level. And I think at the national level, data sovereignty is becoming increasingly an important issue. And interestingly, despite efforts of the World Economic Forum, and in fact now a lot of the UN agencies talking about sort of freedom of cross-border data flows, there is now a recognition even from the big tech companies about cloud sovereignty and about countries starting to own their own data, and for governments to take responsibility. And I think one of the key issues I would argue is that it is up to national governments now to hold international agencies to account, and to say, if you are going to operate in our countries, you do so under certain conditions. The work we at the moment preparing a paper on our response to the Global Digital Compact and the UN Summit of the Future, in which we argue very strongly that it is national and regional global data governance that needs to be taken a lot more seriously, and that the attempt by global institutions to create a one-size-fits-all, and by doing so create this kind of vacuum that sucks data from the local to the national to the global, so that the data is actually not used where it is actually collected. So that's on the national level. I think this is primarily a policy issue for governments to deal with. But I think that at the local level, is a totally different ball game, and I think that I think that I'm humbled by listening to the examples that we've been listening to today about the need for local organizations to be taken seriously, to understand their demands, to apply technologies that are appropriate to their particular needs. I mean, it's interesting that that the humanitarian data exchange, as perhaps one of the problems, also has the humanitarian exchange language, which is one of the greatest data standards, which is a kind of a very simple way of sharing data through spreadsheets, but creating a common format that people can talk to each other. I think the other problem that we come across, and it is the problem that we don't challenge international organizations about, is that everything starts as a fast onset emergency, and most turn into protracted crises. And that is where the problem is. I think that it's totally understandable in a fast onset emergency, if there are very few local infrastructures in place, for international agencies to come in. They want to get the show on the road, they want to get moving, and they set up data infrastructures along with logistics and everything else. But at what point do you move? I mean, I can remember sitting in Cox's Bazaar and talking to my client in New York, and I was saying, you've asked me to report on the Humanitarian Development Nexus, and I'm telling you in Cox's Bazaar it doesn't exist. And they said, well, you clearly have the wrong methodology, because of course it does exist. Just the one thing to finalize on, we're very interested in what we call the core foundational systems that we think can transform low-income countries, and what digital transformation is all about. And just to imagine, in any country, if every primary healthcare clinic was collecting data on a tablet, if every primary school was collecting pupil records, learning outcomes digitally, if every civil registry office was collecting data, you would create a culture and a local infrastructure that would be the basis for all kinds of other types of data collection and an understanding of how we can use data. I think I'll stop there.
Thank you, Bill. Very interesting indeed. So time is kind of running out already a bit, because each of you spent 1 or 2 minutes on top of what was planned, but no worries. So I suggest I start with questions from the room before my questions, because some people might want to leave at 5. So in case you have questions for either one of our panelists, it's your time. For the people that are online, you can either you type your questions in the chat, or you can raise your hand if you prefer. So I don't know if there are anyone in the room or online with a question. Yeah, Kim, you can start because I see you.
Because people online can just hear me.
Normally, yes, there is a mic here. Maybe speak loud, but
sure. My name is Kim. I run something called the H2H network that brings together technical and service provision organizations working in a range of areas, but particularly in IM and data is one of the number, but mostly organizations at a global level at the moment, I have to say. Really interesting presentations. I have 2 questions, if I may. The first one was in response to something Mahan said, which was around this, a lot of the data being collected, a lot of the work being done by private sector organizations in Somalia. I'm really interested in that dynamic of, at a national level, organizations having to compete with the private sector and the implications of that. And I'd be really interested to hear more about what we can do to counter that, to make sure that where people are engaging to do this work with affected populations, they're doing so in ways that adhere to the principles and, you know, are really promoting what we talk about aspirationally. So I'm interested to hear more on that, and if other panelists have view on that. And the second question was something around Asha, I think, said from Tanzania, was around being an example to other organizations and communities in different countries doing similar work, which I think is fantastic. But I'd be really interested to hear what is the mechanism through which that happens. You know, how do you better share best practice across different contexts that might not be connected, and what might possibly be the role for networks that are working more globally to support that. Thanks a lot.
Thanks, Kim. So I hope it was clear to understand online. I think, Mahat, did you hear the first question?
Yes, very well. Yeah, thanks.
Oh.
Thanks, Kim. Yeah, I think the private sector in Somalia are not actually collecting data and they are collecting data, but they are just service providers to international third-party monitoring companies that are global, that are not based in the country, and they are not in a strong position to really negotiate and discuss data management and data privacy and how to use this data and data ownership and things, because the political economy of data in Somalia is that the local consulting companies don't get direct contracts from the donors because the donors don't trust these organizations. They don't believe that they have the capacity to handle these issues and to collect the data. And then they contract companies that operate in many countries, and then that company don't have access to collect data in Somalia. So they have to look for local companies and subcontract, the work, the data collection work. And then the private sector here, the consulting companies are just here for just handouts. They are given a small portion of the entire data and work, and then they provide this service. They recruit local enumerators who risk their lives to go to areas where these humanitarian interventions were implemented with really very, very small daily rate. And then when these people collect the data, the local private companies just share the data with these international consulting companies. And then these are the ones who analyze the data, who present it, who get the credit, and really that is how the value chain of data production in Somalia works. And in that case, the private sector, the consulting companies are really in a very weak position. They are those who have been utilized, and then they don't have any say on how this data they collected is actually being used, and etc. And then the role of the government has also been the same. They came into the situation where, as Bill Anderson put it, there is a parallel data processing infrastructure in place that was built during the state collapse in the country, and there is two interesting cases whereby FAO has the database, the infrastructure to collect data from food-related stuff, and then they have been doing this since 2001. And then the government, when it even started building its own Bureau of Statistics, is really struggling to take over and the management of this data. And there was about 5 years of a transition process and etc. So it's really the government, the private sector in Somalia are in a very weak position now, and are trying to deal with and engage a very strong international actors who have the monopoly of this data, who have already built a very strong infrastructure, and in Somalia, we're not talking about local level data management. We are actually talking about national level data management, and even that itself is not the case here in Somalia. So it's really very, very a concerning situation, I would say, that people really talk about.
Mahad, maybe to also complete a bit, I think, like compared to your question, Kim, from what I hear from what Mahad is saying and other local organizations, I don't think this private sector or not question is so big. Like it's really a question of who holds the power in the data chain and who is, you know, making the orders, basically. And like in Mahad's situation, the issue is that the local subcontractor in Somalia has no agenda on the data collection process. So the nature, whether it's private or non-profit or whatever, doesn't matter so much. The question is who is like in the position to make the decision. And maybe Asha on Kim's second question on like experience sharing around across continents, which is a big question.
Yes, thank you for the question. So, as I said before, we have expertise. We have so many expertise, I would say. So what we do usually at OMGTZ in order to make sure that we share what we have to other organizations for them to stand up as well as ourselves, we do capacity training. So our team usually sometimes travel to other countries to provide them with the training that they have requested. For example, we have been able to travel to Indonesia, to OSM Indonesia, training them how to use drones, RTK as well. We have been able to work with Team Uganda as well as training them on our methodology of community mapping methodologies is our key data collection methodology. So we have been able to work with them consecutively for 2 months, impact them with the knowledge that we have as an organization so that they can also do the same as well as move forward or sustain themselves as well as approach some fundings. So but as well as to in order also to sustain or for what we have established, because we want to create an authentic mappers community in our country as well as in others, we also conduct these industry trainings. When university students are in there after they're completing the education year, we do industry trainings. So we also impact students as well as with the capacities that we have in either data collections or the tools that we are capable with as an organizations, giving them other choice of careers, either to start their own community as well and to stand up on their own through this industry training that we conduct, but also we get to travel to share our knowledge to other organizations in the OSM community. And as now we are part of this OSM exchange, it's also an opportunity for us to share to the rest of the 9 communities our methodologies as well as our approaches to them, so that they could also being able to sustain us how we've been able to sustain ourselves for 7 years now.
Thank you, Asha. And just to complete, I was as one of the facilitators of this group. What I found really interesting is that when we started the work, like the local groups we were facilitating were mostly wanted to talk about technical things, you know, sharing like the how-to of the projects. And we challenged them a bit to discuss on like what we call sustainability, which can be like governance, funding, communication, organization stuff. And then you realize there is a whole thing to explore in terms of sharing good practices and etc., which with a lot of common aspects. Like there are some national differences, of course, but there are also a lot of common challenges faced by this organization. And like even ourselves as a global North organization, we are not used to talk about, you know, this, like not what you do, but the way you make things, and like not the technical part, but the way you structure your organization. But it's a very interesting conversation. We have another question in the room.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much for the great conversation. In my experience, the humanitarian sector, humanitarian organizations often require a very specific type of data to slot into the way the system is run. So we're talking about third-party monitoring. Donors often require a specific set of indicators, specific set of questions. I'm sorry. If we're talking about needs monitoring or needs analysis, there are often very specific indicators that people ask for in order to inform data processes like the IPC, like, you know, these global, you know, analysis processes, or at least similar analyses that people are trying to replicate in different countries, because they slot into the way that needs analysis is done, or that organizations, you know, use to then inform how and where they operate. So I'm wondering, and specifically maybe a question for Had and Asha, is have you been able to influence the kinds of questions that people are asking, or the kinds of information that people are using within the broader system? Because I'm just really interested in knowing how we can, you know, as a system, rely less on, or rely more on local knowledge, not just in the way that the knowledge is gathered by local people, but also informed by local people in terms of what are we even asking, what even is relevant in this context.
Big question, maybe what, Mahad, you want to get started on that, maybe?
Yes, yeah, thanks. That's a really good question. I think there's no such discussion now when it comes to the type of question is the humanitarian organization is ask people when they are doing the needs assessment. I think in what I know is that they have a very long survey and a number of questions to ask, and then they use the local enumerators to go to the you know, displaced people or affected people and collect this data, and then they collect this data, and then the third-party monitoring companies also go there. And then there is this interview fatigue whereby people really don't know how this data will be used, whether it's for something they expect afterwards, or it's an evaluation of something implemented. And then there is this there is a huge question mark on the reliability of really this data and what people express. And then because people have experienced this interview fatigue and have become an experts in giving interviews to these local researchers, they would ask you, are you doing needs assessment so we talk about problems, or you are doing evaluation so we talk about progress? And if you go there doing third-party monitoring, you will never actually see any change in the people's lives. But what you are looking for is something that has changed in the lives of these people. But people will fake it because they become an expert in giving interviews to these enumerators. So and it's really there is no really discussion on the type of questions the humanitarian organization should ask these people, and they are running. And what is unfortunate here in Somalia is that the humanitarian agencies have a operation budget and resources that is way much higher than government institutions, and they have the leverage. What they say is have an influence. They can get things done through the government structures, and clearly there is no such institution is asking them questions on the questions they are asking these people, the systems they are using to collect this data, how they are handling sensitive data, private data. Even they take fingerprints, they take you know, photos of these people, the very private information, and actually no one knows how they are using this information. It's really concerning, as I said, and there is no such discussion on the type of questions they ask the people in here.
It's really also a power balance question, as Matt had. In the study, I quote a survey that was done among like 140 low and middle income countries, national statistical institutes. So they asked them who was their main user in their mind, and the majority of them answered global donors more than their national government, by far. And it's also because there is a funding gap at the global level for national statistics institutes, which funding gap is covered only by global donors, which is the one like adding, the last part of the funding that is necessary to operate. So at the end of the day, as long as you have this power structure both for national statistic institute inside the private sector, as Mahat described, and also in the NGO sector, there is no possibility to make the system evolve. So that's, I would say, both like this conversation is interesting because we are challenging this big question from the data lens, and at the same time, it's very frustrating because we see very fastly that we cannot change the data side itself without changing the whole system. So we fastly come to a limitation, unfortunately. I see that Ibrahim has raised his hand for a question or a remark. Go on. No, the hand is unraised, so maybe it's a cancelled question. And I think, Innocent, you raised your hand before. Maybe you want to make an additional comment. Ibrahim is back.
Yeah. So hi, Martin, and the panel and everyone online. So let me just, I hope everyone can see me. So I just wanted to add a few points to the first that Asha was addressing on how OMDTZ is linking with or helping, the African ecosystem, around, mapping. So I just wanted to mention that there are different levels to how we engage with, different communities across Africa. So the first one is around organizing State of the Map Tanzania, which is an opportunity for people to come to Tanzania, and we have 2 or 3 days of learning where we share, not only us, but everyone shares their their work experiences, challenges, and some of the learnings that they have they have seen all the way, and that has always helped peer-to-peer, I'd say peer-to-peer learning, where you get that opportunity to ask questions, to understand, to see results such as maps and some of the tools that we use, through that period. And attending also State of the Map Africa, which is also a regional event, has always been another opportunity for us to also share our projects, our methodology, our tools that we work with, and stuff like that. Also, people get an opportunity to learn from there. Apart from that, there is also another aspect of partnerships, where we we conduct. I mean, in terms of proposals or projects, we usually entertain or attract partnerships with these communities, whether we are submitting a proposal together. We have won some of the proposals together with OSM Uganda, with OSM Liberia, and some of the other communities. And in this case, because we are technically ahead of others, so it's easier for us to give this experience practically, because we are working on the same project. So we are working on different angles where we are helping each other, to be able to accomplish a project and then deliver to a client. So that's the second one. But the third one is around. So we've done. We have hosted OSM Ethiopia, if I can recall, maybe OSM Somalia. I mixed the two, but one of the community had an opportunity to come here to Tanzania, where we spent around 4 or 5 days, and we were looking at different aspects of how they could be able, as an organization, how they could be able to grow and also promote open mapping in their country. So that involved training them around business development, how they could be able to write proposals, submit, how they could build relationships with donors, and maintain, of course, the relationships and so forth. Also, that went around finance training, where in most cases as Africans, one of the main problems is always managing funds. So one of the topics that we had was how they could be able to manage funds once they have the projects ready, or otherwise be able to create an organization budget that can help them help planning in terms of the organization growth. We are peers in this, so we already know who is doing what at least in every country, because there is a channel where we have all the open community mapping groups within this channel. So it's easier for us to know who is doing what in a different country. So we are connected in that way, and we are using our influence to be able to, to support these communities, and so that they can be able to grow and thrive. So yeah, I just wanted to add that. Thank you, Martin.
Thank you, Innocent. Yeah, good to develop it. So we don't have a lot of time left. I believe I'll leave the floor to Ibrahim for your question. Ibrahim, can you try speaking so we can see if it works?
Yes.
Yeah. Okay,
I'll try to make it concise and based on what was said in countries where the government is in its state building and there are civil wars and a fragility. And I think they have more issues than a localization of data. And first of that, it's having reliable data, because in a number of areas and where the insecurity is high, people might get interview fatigue, and the information and the data that getting from there is compromised. So that's one issue. And another point that Bill Anderson mentioned is that governments have to really advocate to getting those data from international NGOs. So considering what I said about fragility and state building countries in civil war, they don't have that capacity and that negotiation power in getting into that, because they have other priorities like in civil wars and local issues that are more important to them than considering data. But at the same time, data is important for futures, because as the years go by, those data are needed for future plans and future development. So, and all the panelists, each who can add a comment, how such governments can deal with these issues and having other priorities and being fragility, and the issue of data being compromised due to the major issues, and as for example interviews being and get into the culture of being paid to give back information, and for the sake of that and fabricating information in areas where there are fragility, and for the purpose and for the sake of getting projects going on. So that's my basic question: is how can such governments have the ability to negotiate, and what solution is for getting reliable data on areas of civil wars and fragility? Thank you.
Thanks, Ibrahim. It's a pretty tough question, so I don't know if one of our panelists wants to try a short answer on this very big question. No volunteers.
Bill Anderson.
Well, I mean, to me, the issue is at what point does a fast onset crisis become protracted? And I mean, I'm not a humanitarian, so I don't know my facts very well, but I mean, isn't it sort of the average length of a crisis now 10 years? And so that I think there is a need for a long view to be taken. And I think that there is a need then, even where, I mean, so for example, when we were working in South Sudan, where the government was not in a position or willing really to fight for its own data infrastructures. You had actually a very committed National Statistics Office, who, by the way, were not being paid. And they stayed and they were committed to trying to build their own data infrastructures. And I think to be able to support those at any cost. So I think I think that there is a need in all humanitarian work to now take the long view, because invariably there is a long view.
Thanks, Bill. And yeah, indeed, I think like a conclusion on many aspects is that we currently need mostly advocacy on these topics to make the issue out, put the issue out there and discuss them, because the actors that are pushing, and I think most of the actors in the room are pushing in the same direction, I would say too weak in the system to be able to push the change by ourselves, like only the data people, if I can say. So there is a big need of like coalitions and common advocacy on creating awareness on these topics, and it's also a bit what we are trying to do with our study at our level in CartONG. So there is a very long question / comment from Shivan in the chat, which is quite interesting, but also pretty complex, because she's asking, all in all, like how can we reform the system to avoid parallel reporting channels between NGOs, donors, and the donors themselves in their own national system? So I don't know if the panelists want to dive in on a short answer on that, which could be also a bit a conclusion. Otherwise, I think we will switch to, maybe we can already switch to final words from each of you. And if you want to tackle a bit this question at the same time, you can do it. So I don't know, like who wants to start for our final one?
I'll kick in on the donor issue. We wrote a paper called Data Disharmony, where we did question the fact that donors all have their own strategic interests and compete with each other, and why can they not agree on a common set of data for needs and for monitoring and evaluation? Just a short anecdote: we were working in Zimbabwe. It's not humanitarian, but we were talking to a nurse who was working with HIV patients. And she had a reporting sheet as long as your arm that she had to fill in. We asked why, and she said, well, we've got 3 different donors and they each want different answers for every single patient we see. And so I think that there's a lot of responsibility on donors to get their act together and work together rather than compete against each other.
That's a good conclusion, very concise and committed. Asha or Mahad, final word?
Maybe thanks. I would say in my final remarks that the international actors and donors should collaborate with governments in despite being fragile. It's important that they also work with the governments to promote and institutionalize data protection procedures. Particularly the protection of aid recipients' personal information. I think this is very important in situations like Somalia and South Sudan and other post-conflict countries, where government institutions are relatively weak, weaker than the humanitarian and development actors and donors who are supporting them. And another important thing I think relates to the uptake, the communities whose data are collected, analyzed, used for programming and for evaluations should be involved in and benefit from the dissemination and the uptake of these studies. So they just become the subjects and have really been not seeing any of the outputs that are produced from the interviews they provided and the data that has been collected. I think in Somalia case, there is a need to publicly disseminate and share findings from the third-party monitoring studies and other aid research, related research that are conducted by different actors in Somalia. And finally, I would say that international actors should work with government authorities to promote the production, storage, and the dissemination of publicly available data and statistics, including georeferenced and other types of visual data. And I think and access to data, particularly those who have already been collected to different actors, is really missing in contexts like Somalia, and that's something that needs to be advanced, I think, so that other actors can utilize, journalists can use this data to present some interesting findings. The local civil society organizations can use this data for their own advocacy and programming. And I think that is something that needs to also be collectively collaborated on. I will stop here. Thank you, Martin. Over to you.
Thanks a lot, Mahad. And Asha, very quickly, a conclusion, maybe?
Okay, so for me, my remarks and recommendation would be to the international organization agencies is to let the local lead everything in our country. As open map developers, we were given a chance. That's why we're here today. So giving them that authority to lead the process, or as well as to the end of the output, it creates the ownership, but also sustainability to this organization, to this community in general. And also, like, together we can work on bridging the gender technology in gender as well, so that could increase the women participation in these activities, as well, as we all know that they are the one who face a lot of challenges compared to the other gender. So yeah, that's it. Thank you.
Thanks a lot, Tasha. So thank you for all our attendees. So our speakers cannot see the room, like they only see me, unfortunately. I'm a bit sad that we don't have many people left. I guess it's also linked to the time, like it's really the end of the day, the very packed day of the conference, but still I cannot help but think that we have a bit of difficulty still to articulate like what we are trying to express here in terms of empowering local actors toward data. So I hope these various illustrations have helped it. And I think for CartONG, this is really foundational to like a lot of questions around good data management, allowing innovation, allowing empowerment of local actors, changing the humanitarian system. There is quite a lot of, I think, conversations to have, advocacy to make, and changes to do, obviously. So I hope we can continue this discussion in the future with our panelists, with the people in the room and online. I send you some contacts if you're interested to keep on. Of course, the link to our study, which is available online. And thank you very much to all our panelists, because it was a very, very interesting debate.